Hello, it's me with a book review. It's been a long time since I've done a book review, so I'm going to be doing one now with Doomsday book by Connie Willis. This is a speculative fiction book that deals with time travel. Have you ever been asked that question, if you could go anywhere back in time, where would you go? Well, whenever I get asked that question, I always think, well, am I going to be interacting with people? And if I am going to be interacting with people, am I going to know the language of the place where I'm going? Am I going to know all the history? What do I have? Am I going to be able to have vaccines for every illness that's in there? Doomsday book answers those questions really well. So we have a character named Kivrin, who is a historian. Historians are people who go back in time and record what they see. Kivrin has been training for this for a while. She's been learning different languages. She's gotten all her inoculations against illnesses during the times when she's going. She really wants to go to the Middle Ages, and she just got approved to go. I believe it's to the 1320s. So Kivrin goes back in time. But of course there are complications with her going back in time, and it's really her dealing with those complications and figuring things out and trying just to get back into the present day. Now, this takes place in 2054, by the way. And in the present day, you also have Mr. Dunworthy, who is the mentor of Kivrin. He's kind of taught her everything she needs to know, and if he couldn't teach her, he got her the resources that she needed. Well, while Kivrin is dealing with the things in the past, Mr. Dunworthy is dealing with some messed up stuff in the present day. And by messed up, I just mean that there's complications that arise, which make it difficult to get Kivrin back to the present day. This is not so much a spoiler because it's within the first 50 to 100 pages, and this book is close to 500 pages long. But Mr. Dunworthy is dealing with an epidemic that ends up breaking out, and that's kind of why they're having this hard time getting Kivrin back. Because her team, who've been trained to get her at a certain date and time, are all falling sick. So that's what Mr. Dunworthy is dealing with, and he's really worried about Kivrin. So you have these two timelines going on. Admittedly, I have not read a lot of books that have time travel. And if they do have time travel, it's kind of very vague on how they do the time travel, and there's not really a lot of thought placed into it other than how to not mess up the timelines too badly. Doomsday book takes into major considerations what people would need to know and what people would need in order to survive back in time and not just perish. So the world building of this book is done extremely well. And I guess I should have started off with that. I like this book a lot. I think it is really well thought out. I love the characters. It is in third person, limited perspective between Kivrin and Mr. Dunworthy, and both of them are just really great characters to follow. Kivrin is a really determined character. She's done so much just to get where she is and be able to go back in time. And she's actually pretty resourceful once she is back in time, even when things are going just horrifically wrong. And then Mr. Dunworthy, with his worry about Kivrin, just kind of warmed my heart because he's such a father figure to her, and you can really feel that relationship between the two. The pacing is done really well in this book. I never felt like it dragged at all. This is the second book of Connie Willis that I have read, and I have to admit, I just like her writing a lot. She's a really smart writer, and I believe she solely does speculative fiction, and I'm definitely going to be reading more of her work because she just does such a great job. Now, admittedly, if I had one thing to kind of quibble on with this book, it would be the treatment of one particular character, and her name is Maisry. So Maisry is a lady's maid in the 1300s, and when Kivrin first hears about Maisry, it's pretty much indicating that Maisry's a ho-ho-ho. When Kivrin then sees Maisry, Kivrin's thought process is she's not the most pretty of gals. And that's not Kivrin being mean, rather Kivrin's just confused. People are indicating that she's sleeping around, or that she's having sex with a lot of people, but she doesn't look like this wildly seductress that Kivrin had built up in her head. The reason why I think that her character is kind of done dirty is because later on Kivrin gets really annoyed with Maisry and kind of starts treating her a little bit like how everyone else treats her. Now, Kivrin doesn't abuse her, but it's kind of like Kivrin takes on the mindset of everyone else towards Maisry, which I think is kind of unfair. Because Maisry, she is propositioned by men, I think, a lot. We get hints of that and we get contextual clues. But I don't necessarily think it's like what Maisry wants. Like, I don't think this is necessarily the most consensual thing that Maisry goes through. Now, I will say that the author does somewhat address this, but you don't really get to see those scenes with Maisry. Like, it's all contextual clues and people kind of talking about Maisry going off with so-and-so. But that's my thoughts on Maisry. I just thought that she was kind of given an unfair shake, and that Kivrin was kind of taking on the attitudes of everyone else, when Maisry probably did not want all those guys to come round her door. I mentioned earlier that there is an epidemic that breaks out in Doomsday Book, and I do want to mention, for context, that this book was written in the 80s, 90s. It was published in the 90s, and I believe the author spent like quite a lot of time writing this book. So the information that Connie Willis uses in this book, a lot of it is very accurate to what we have been seeing in this time, like with the pandemic going on. A lot of it is accurate to how things spread, you know, precautions that people have been taking and all that kind of stuff. Granted, the illness in this book works a lot faster than the illness that we've been seeing this year, but a lot of it is like spot on the nose. There are a few things that Connie Willis puts into the book that is a little bit outdated, but for the most part, it holds up remarkably well. I know that probably a lot of people wouldn't want to really read a book that features an illness which people have to quarantine from, but it's a good book. I do heavily recommend this book, especially if you like the more realistic science fiction, so going into the speculative fiction realm. Connie Willis is just so good at writing. I really like her books a lot. That is my review for Doomsday Book. Please let me know what you think, if you have read this book, or if you have read any other Connie Willis books, or if you have a recommendation based on what I've said about this book. That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much for watching and sticking with me, and as always and forever, may get lost in